Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining on your Saturday. Let's get started since we have quite a bit to cover. My name is Helena. I'm the design director at Medium, and I'm here today with a few folks from the Wikimedia Foundation. Um, and today we're going to go behind the scenes on one of the most ubiquitous products in the world, Wikipedia. Maybe you've heard of it. I think it's something I use every day, and it's become almost invisible to me. But yeah, we're gonna kind of peel back the curtain here. And um, recently, Wikipedia has rolled out a major redesign, and we're going to use that as the jumping off point for our conversation. So let me kick it over to Olga if you want to introduce the team, and then we can go from there. So format-wise, we'll do an overview of the foundation and the projects, and then we'll open for discussion. We'll have a conversation around building for an international audience. And then at the end, we will open for Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, please drop it in the Q&A tab. That's to your right. If you look at the sessions tab, underneath that, there's a Q&A. Drop it as they pop into your head. And then my colleague Naf will be collecting those up. At the very end, we'll see how many we can get through. Okay, cool. Sounds good? All right, Olga, take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. So my name is Olga, and I work as a product manager for the Wikimedia Foundation, which is the nonprofit that hosts Wikipedia and also other volunteer-driven projects. And I'll let Alex and Jan introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm Alex. I'm a designer. I've worked for the foundation for the past 5.5 years. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm Jan. I'm an engineer on the web team at the Wikimedia Foundation as well. Also been there a bunch of years.
All right, so we're here today to talk about what it's like building for Wikipedia and sort of use our recent redesign, like Helena mentioned, as a case study. And yeah, building for Wikipedia is a pretty unique experience, both due to its size and its volunteer community. As many of you know, Wikipedia is a free online encyclopedia, which is created, edited, and verified by volunteers. And these volunteers come from all around the world. And it's big. So Wikipedia is read by close to 1 billion people per day. And English Wikipedia, which is our largest edition, contains around 7 million articles that have been created over many, many years by more than 13 million volunteers. And that's just scratching the surface. So our mission is to bring basically all of the world's knowledge to everyone in the world, which is pretty ambitious, but also in their own language. So right now, Wikipedia is available in 318 languages. And each of these languages is slightly different and has a community of volunteers and readers that have different needs and a different cultural context. So for example, many Wikipedias might have an article on something like bread. However, the article on bread on French Wikipedia might contain different content than the article on bread on Canada or on English Wikipedia, depending on the cultural context and also depending on what those volunteers decided or did not decide to include. So each of these communities is very different and vibrant in their own ways. There's Wikipedias that have billions of readers, and there's others that have languages where native speakers might be in the thousands, so they can be really small. Some languages tend to have more readers and editors on desktop, for example, while others, especially in emerging markets, might tend to use their mobile phones instead to read and edit Wikipedia. In addition to all of this, different languages might have different needs for the interface itself, with some tools being more important or prominent on small Wikipedias, while others being more important or prominent on large Wikipedias. So when we're developing, we need to take all of these things into consideration and make a product that sort of works for everyone, but it is also customizable enough to account for these needs. So this sort of creates a complex and kind of intricate system for development. The Wikimedia Foundation teams work really closely with our communities so that when we are building the software, we can have this ongoing collaboration. The main thing here is that we aim to build really transparently. So all of our documentation, our project plans, everything is happening in public. on Wiki, as we say. And that's a way that we get constant feedback and iteration based on sort of the needs and the responses from communities across these 300 plus languages. So things can get quite complex, but it's fun. So we wanted to use our recent redesign as sort of a case study for how this process works and how we plan to improve it in the future based on what we've learned. As a bit of background, in early 2023, we launched Wikipedia's first major redesign, or what we called an improvement on the desktop interface in over 10 years. And our main goal here was to make Wikipedia more welcoming to audiences around the world. Over the past 10 years, kind of the internet and the fabric of the internet has changed. We've seen new people come to our sites from all over the world. And we realized that the interface that we had in the past was not necessarily built for or fitting of their needs. So we wanted to change that, and we did. This change followed sort of our tradition of years of iteration and took a lot of inspiration from tools and ideas and projects that communities themselves had experimented with in the past. And I'm going to hand it off to Alex, who will go a little bit more into detail on the design.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, just going to do a super quick demo here, just to kind of help people get a little bit more context and a concrete sense of what has changed with the interface with this recent redesign. So yeah, real quick, what you're seeing right now is Wikipedia's interface around 2004. It was a skin called Monobook, and it's actually still available. If you make an account and log in, you can select this as your default interface. And as you can see, the interface that came after this, which was the vector interface, and this is, I'm going to guess, the one most people here are familiar with. Maybe for some of you who use Wikipedia a lot, this already feels old or outdated because you haven't seen it in a few months. But this is the interface that you likely grew up with and are used to seeing. And it hadn't really changed much since 2004. A lot of work had been done on the editing experience and some other parts of Wikipedia. And as Olga was saying, like, some changes were done that were local to specific Wikipedia communities, but were not available for everyone. And then, yeah, this is the current interface. This is the one that we all worked on for the past few years. And just to highlight a few aspects, we moved the table of contents over to the side and it stays in place as you scroll down the page. We also tried to make it a little bit more manageable in terms of like subsections and things like that. We moved the language switcher to a much more prominent spot at the top of the page, and the language team has done a bunch of cool improvements to the language switching and translation experiences. We moved the search bar to the top of the sort of site header and made a bunch of improvements there. And yeah, as Olga was mentioning, there are a lot of different needs and use cases, both among different Wikipedia communities, but also among different users of Wikipedia. So if you're an editor and you spend a few hours on Wikipedia each day making edits and verifying things and having discussions, you might sort of want some of these menus to be pinned open and readily accessible whenever you land on a page. But if you're just a reader, you probably don't even have an account, and you most likely don't need most of the things in those menus. So we've moved towards a kind of more like modular, customizable approach with the interface, and have started, moving things into menus, reworking the information architecture, etc. And yeah, I think we'll probably get into other aspects of the redesign throughout the chat, but we just wanted to give people a sort of high level overview to make it clear what's changed and what we worked on and how it looks today.
Thank you, Alex. What I love about this redesign is that it still feels spiritually like Wikipedia. You know, it's not like a completely different looking and feeling thing. And it's really about making those improvements that are subtle but make a big difference. Um, so I like to open with, I was pretty surprised to learn about the decentralized model of the foundation. Like, how does it work? That actually Wikipedia is 300 plus different versions. So I'm curious, how do you guys wrap your head around that? Or do you? How do you kind of think about that?
There's a lot to go into, but I'll just start by saying that it really affects everything we do at the foundation. This decentralized model goes deep into how we prioritize features, into the decision-making process. It affects the design process as well as development. And Olga and Alex can speak in more detail on that.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the way that we sort of decide to bring this audience together, because it's really difficult to be able to have conversations with 300 individual communities. So when we're building, it's really important that we have touch points across different communities that we have direct contact with. And what we call here is like our early adopters or pilot wikis. And we basically try to identify communities that are a good sample for our global community. So for example, for this project, we tried to have really, really strong bonds and connections with communities across the world from different continents and different scripts. So we wanted to make sure that we had at least 6 or 7 different scripts in this first set of communities, that we had different languages, different continents, and also different size of the Wikipedias themselves. So as I was saying earlier, we wanted to have a large Wikipedia, such as French Wikipedia, which we worked really closely with, but also some really, really smaller projects. So I think, for example, we had Korean Wikisource, which is a website that it's a project that brings different sources from different places together, that has maybe 5 or 6 volunteers that are active on that site. We basically wanted to work across these different projects to get a representation, or to get as much of a mapping of the overall community structure as we possibly could. And it was really important just because that really forced us to begin building from the very beginning, kind of from day one, thinking about all of these different edge cases that certain communities, especially smaller communities, would have, that we would have not gotten if we were only speaking, kind of to English Wikipedia or French Wikipedia, or these kind of like larger, more established communities for whom, kind of future growth is relevant, but not necessarily as important because they've been around for 10 years, 20 years, or even longer.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things that's really tricky. It's both very powerful and also leads to a lot of complexity. The Wikipedia interface can be customized at the user level. It can be customized at the community level. It can be customized at the project level, and then it could be sort of changed at the core level. And because of that, I mean, we can't even really begin to keep track of all of the different customizations that have been introduced across these 300 plus sites. And I mean, it's kind of fun. Sometimes you'll be exploring some new like some Wikipedia in some new language that you've never checked out before, and you'll be like, whoa, they have this button here, or they did this special thing with a background image or with a header, and you like take a screenshot and send that in Slack to people. You're like, look what I found. Like, it's like a rare Pokemon or something like that. And it's really fun and it's really interesting, but it's also difficult because, for example, if we wanted to put the language switcher into that sort of more prominent position in the header, we have to figure out like, well, what communities have already used that space for some custom feature. And again, different features make sense. If you're a really small Wikipedia, maybe you want a button that says like add a new article, or really prominently like, I don't know, invite you to create an account or something. And maybe if you're a bigger Wikipedia, that's not so important and you would want to use that space for something else. So yeah, it's really fun and interesting, and also difficult just to keep track of everything. We sort of, as the foundation, I guess, theoretically are like the central planning sort of like function across all these 300 different projects, but yeah, even still, it's very difficult to keep track of everything that's happening.
Yeah. Like even some of the things you associate with Wikipedia, like the info box, is not like part of the software. That's something that the communities develop themselves, and each language manages that info box themselves. So if we make a change that might modify it or break it on one Wikipedia, then, well, they all have to update it as well. And this gives them the freedom to do whatever they want, basically, on their sites, but also definitely you can understand why the project took 3 years when working in this fashion.
And it was really important for us to continue with this spirit too, to not, kind of go into the project and say, okay, well, we're going to take ownership of absolutely everything on the site. And if you had something where the language switcher would go, it would just disappear. And maybe Jan can talk a little bit more about this, but we were very intentional around continuing to allow people to build out gadgets, people to build out tools on specific communities, but worked a little bit more to structure the way that was happening so that if it breaks, it could only break in predictable ways rather than kind of vastly unpredictable ways.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to kind of pave the cow paths in a certain sense and adopt some of the solutions that communities made already, but we still had to be conscious of like the things that Alex mentioned, that there's just so many different we actually call them gadgets that people can use to enhance their experience on Wikipedia, usually for editing purposes.
Sounds like there's so much to discover, and the point is not to kind of wrap your head around it and to kind of control, or I think it's very inspiring how it kind of just works. Like we have all these volunteers and people working across the world to make it happen. How do you guys communicate each other across different versions of Wikipedia? Or let's say if I were to update the info box, let's say on this one, how would that change be adopted, or how would I communicate that change or advocate it for it to be adopted on the other ones?
So I think it really depends. So as we were saying earlier, different communities have different contexts and also a lot of the time different sets of editors. So for example, if an info box change on I don't know, Chinese Wikipedia makes sense for Chinese Wikipedia, it might not make sense for English, or it might not make sense for Arabic. And so it really depends on the change itself. But generally, there's people that do a lot of work across languages and editors who are very multilingual who track these pages and track changes to these pages. So most likely what's going to happen, if someone updates the info box, someone else will be watching or tracking that page that speaks one or two or more languages. And then we'll look at that change and say, oh, okay, well, maybe this is a new discovery and we need to add it into this other Wikipedia. Or, oh, maybe this is actually not that important. Maybe this is more local context. It doesn't make sense for this other Wikipedia. And then they'll probably make that review and then continue making the change. A lot of this sounds really manual because it is. And we have tools that make it easier to flag these changes, make it easier to tell you, oh, someone has made this change. But I do think that we rely on that manualness of it quite a lot, and on, someone actually coming in and saying, oh, okay, yes, I think this is important, or let me check my references. Maybe based on these references, maybe it's not as important for this Wikipedia, and having kind of like a human make that decision.
Yeah, for sure. One element is the fact that there are a lot of conversations happening on Wikipedia that you don't really see as a reader. Like on each article, there is a talk button that you can go, and that'll show you like the discussions about that article. And there's other pages that are just discussions about Wikipedia itself. And another aspect of it is that there's just so many people who do so much manual things on Wikipedia that you have people who just fix grammar mistakes. You have people who do make these templates and just update those. And, other people who do, just so many different things that I can't even recall right now. But it really depends on that community.
Yeah, and I think there's this kind of interesting tension that I like, which is between sort of on one end, independence and kind of cultural specific sort of expression. And then on the other end, you've got, I don't know, it sort of sounds like a bad word or something, but like conformity or consistency. And I think to a certain degree, like, you know, the Wikipedia communities don't want to be so different from each other that if you go from German Wikipedia to Burmese Wikipedia, all of a sudden, like, you don't know where anything is. You know, it's like they all want the traffic lights to, you know, have red, green, and yellow, and the stop signs to be the same shape or whatever. And we actually worked on an interesting project a while back, the three of us, which was, there are these notices at the top of articles that'll tell you if an article is maybe like lacking sufficient citations, or if it's written in a biased way, or it seems like it was written by the person who the article is about. They're kind of like little warning signs. And not each community, but many communities had developed their own set of icons that like indicate the different types of issues, and French in particular had made this really beautiful set of icons. And it was sort of like this tricky moment where it's like, you sort of want consistency there, because again, it's nice if you're going from one Wikipedia to another one that this icon means this specific issue. But at the same time, it's like how can you take away those like beautiful, eccentric, like special, unique creations that each community has made? So I think that's something we're constantly navigating, and the communities themselves are navigating. And some communities are maybe a little more influential than others in certain ways, kind of like, you know, geopolitics or something like that. Some countries are maybe just bigger and have a bit more attention on them or something. So yeah, it's like this constant push and pull and dance collaboration kind of thing.
Dance, I love that. Can you talk a little bit about? Sorry, enough.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna bring up a question, but you can go first.
Yeah. Can you talk about one thing that came up in our conversations leading up to this one was around, you know, in addition to the different users of Wikipedia being in different locations and having different needs that way, there are the kind of readers of Wikipedia and the editors. And how do you answer for those different needs? Are there any cases where they're competing, or how do you resolve that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was pretty central in the design process in this redesign for sure.
Yeah, I think one of our main goals going into this was this idea of being welcoming and being able to welcome new readers while not alienating people that were already on the site. And I think Alex was kind of leaning to this. I think a part of that was having the site continue, regardless of what we do, having the site continue to look and feel like Wikipedia. And, you know, kind of like if we look at Wikipedia 10 years ago and now, the changes are subtle. They're there, but they're subtle. Another thing that we really wanted to focus on was kind of the tools that were available as well. We knew that maybe not everyone is using all of these tools, but going into the redesign, we decided that we were not going to be taking any of the tools away or changing the tools in significant ways. So, you know, things might look different, things might be collapsed under menus, things might be reorganized in various ways, but they weren't going to actually change. And I think that was really important, specifically for editors that rely on these tools for their kind of everyday work. I think more in general, it really depends on the project, and it really depends on exactly what we're building for. But I think beginning to work with communities early on is really important, because ultimately the people who are on the site, who are editors, they have the same goals as us. They want to bring more knowledge to more readers around the world, and they want to be able to get the work that they're doing in front of as many people as possible in the most useful way, so that they can actually, you know, kind of like learn from that information and not just, you know, kind of skim it or look at it. And so I think something that's really important for us going into any project, but specifically this one, was to like really talk to the communities early on and kind of establish a baseline where we agree on what the goals of a project are, which is in this case, let's get everyone to feel more welcome on the site. Okay, and that's something that we can do together as editors, because the editors themselves are doing this for readers and for people to be able to gain knowledge. So I think establishing that as a baseline really helps as well.
Yeah, I mean, right. So I do think it's pretty clear that readers and editors have different needs and use the site differently. And we can see that in the data. We also kind of know that empirically. And so, yeah, I mean, this question of like, okay, so then how do you accommodate that, or what do you do about that? I think something we thought about pretty early on was like, we can sort of differentiate the logged in experience from the logged out experience, because that's like a pretty clear fork in the road. There are a bunch of people who like to edit logged out, like sort of anonymously. And we're like very supportive of that. We're very supportive of privacy and those kinds of concerns. But so that's like one way to think about it. And then you come on this sort of interesting problem, which is like, if you make the logged out like reading experience almost like super minimal, then are you removing the opportunity for readers to sort of like find their way behind the scenes? Like maybe some of the menus and some of the links and tools that you used to see when you were logged out, maybe those are like interesting to some people. And so they'll click on a button or a random thing, even if they don't know what it means, and somehow like find themselves in a different part of the experience. So yeah, it definitely gets tricky. And I think another part of it that's really interesting to me is, you know, we're talking about sort of the consensus driven democratic process of making decisions here. It's kind of like the digital version of like a town hall or something. But for the most part, the people showing up to those town hall meetings are editors. They're people with very specific needs. The readers don't really show up to those town hall meetings. So then there's this other whole question of like, how do you represent the needs of the readers in those discussions? Are we as staff members kind of able to speak for the readers? Do we actually need to get some of the readers to show up and participate? And how do you sort of, I don't know, yeah, deal with all of that? I think the interface maybe had been skewing a little bit more towards the needs of the editors, again, because they're sort of the primary like audience in these spaces, and they're showing up to those conversations and stuff. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of ongoing question, is like, how do you make sure everyone's voice is represented at the table and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, but a good example.
Sorry, I just want to say time check, and because there's a few questions coming in, if we can maybe answer them.
Sure. Let's, Jan, you want to finish your thought, and maybe we can toggle over. I have one more thing actually I want to touch on before we get to questions. No, go ahead,
I just
Jan.
wanted to say that one good example of this kind of tension between the needs of readers and editors was the fixed width. We changed the width of the text on Wikipedia, and that caused just like outrage among editors, because they're the kind of people who want as much text on the page as possible, because they're editing, they're scanning, they're fixing typos, they're really like working with the text. But readers, you know, in design, you know that like a shorter line length increases readability. So we eventually made that like an option for people to turn on and off. So it does kind of provide some like modality in the interface that way.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like, I would make an assumption that you would want a kind of shorter width so that you can read better, but that might not be the case, depending on your use case. Yeah, I have one more thing, and then we can open up for Q&A. As we're talking about editors, something we think about a lot at Medium is quality, and how do we think about that? How do we define that? And kind of, I think there's a whole topic here around like credibility, accuracy. When I think of Wikipedia, how does the team, knowing that it's a volunteer-based system, how do you guys think about that, like credibility of the content that's presented, and working with editors?
Yeah, so kind of what I was saying earlier about this sort of human touch is that our system sort of works. So I think for us, from the foundation's perspective, our responsibility is basically to build out tools to make it easier for editors to make those decisions on quality, to make it easier for editors to scan things that might have issues with quality, to give hints on things that might have issues with quality, rather than to make any of the decisions ourselves. And I think that is what makes the system work the most, is that all of these decisions are made through this democratic process by volunteers. And they get very, very detailed. I mean, we have kind of larger conversations around disinformation and around how Wikipedia can keep, kind of its quality. And then when you go into, for example, talk pages, like Jan was saying earlier, I always feel really, really kind of shocked at like the level of detail that these conversations are at, because most of these conversations are not at the level of detail of, oh, is this a true fact or not? They're more, did this fact come from this paragraph on this page from this article, or did it come from the next one? Or is this the correct spelling of this word on this person's name? Because in this reference, it's spelled in a slightly different way. And then you'll see people talking and talking and talking for days over this, for even the smallest kind of tidbit or fact, to get it exactly precise. And I think that system and enabling that system to continue and to make it a little bit easier to be able to engage in that system is sort of more our job as the foundation, is really giving editors the tools in order for them to be able to do what they want to do, which is kind of these really, really, really detailed analyses into truth and into what is true and what deserves to be written down as kind of the historical record and go into Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think something we talked about a little bit in one of our past conversations is, right, like maybe a little bit invisible to the general public, but as Olga is kind of describing and referring to, like behind the scenes, Wikipedia is like constantly teeming with life. There are so many people who are so actively engaged with all of these different projects, checking things, discussing things, whatever. Something I love to show people, because most people haven't like found this on their own, is if you open up the main menu, there's a link called Recent Changes, and you can turn on a live feed of recent changes, and you can see like multiple edits a second being made to English Wikipedia, or you can go to a smaller Wikipedia and it'll be a little bit slower. So yeah, I think that's a huge part that like most people don't really know about, and it's really cool to explore. I haven't worked as much with the editing tools, but I know that there have been some pretty cool things developed around sort of like machine learning, training models to understand if an edit is maybe vandalism or if it's a good faith edit or whatever. And the editors don't like just rely on those to be correct. Like they'll use that as kind of an input, but there are some tools that have been developed to sort of help scale this effort of like checking all this different stuff. I think like to a certain degree, like reputation plays into it. It's like these people, once they've been editing for a while, they get to know each other, and they might sort of like assume like, okay, this person knows what they're doing, this person needs a little bit more help. So yeah, it's a really interesting system. One other last thing I'll say is like, I've wanted to make a graphic of this for a while, but I think, again, something people don't fully understand about a Wikipedia article is it's really like a tapestry or like a patchwork kind of quilt that's made up of facts that have been published elsewhere. So it's like, as if you could imagine like this sphere of like articles and scholarly journals and research and all this other stuff, like on the one hand, and then it's like the Wikipedia editors like pluck all of the most relevant facts like out of those reliable sources, and they kind of like stitch them together into this coherent article, which is what you're reading. But a really, really good high quality Wikipedia article, which is, you know, many of them, it's like a sort of like perfect mapping from those sources to the article, and there's no additional, you know, like opinion based information in there. So yeah, the articles are really like as good as the sources and like the editors who are deriving them from the sources.
For sure. I will also just add that I think that the foundation is also exploring ways where we can, like, quality is very variable on Wikipedia. There are articles that are biased, there are articles that are better than others. And I think exposing that, like, building trust in Wikipedia through transparency is something that we are exploring on doing, because, you know, just exposing that, like Alex said, we have some machine learning models that can detect like lower quality articles, you know, maybe exposing those scores more to editors so that they know whether or not that article they're looking at can be trustworthy, or they should have some skepticism, is an area that we are exploring too.
Yeah, transparency is so important. There's going to be bias one way or another, right? Whether it's human bias or yeah. All right, Naf, let's open up for questions. Do you have one that you want to start with?
Yes, there's a bunch, and I don't know if we can answer all of them, but there are some really great ones coming up lately. And the first question I will ask is, curious, after the launch of ChatGPT, what kind of change have you seen in direct readers, people coming straight to Wikipedia?
Quick answer. Well, no, I don't think we've seen too much of a change or have established a link between, you know, necessarily the launch of ChatGPT and sort of readers to Wikipedia. That said, you know, we are having a number of conversations around how these two types of technologies can interact with one another and what it means to be an encyclopedia in a world where conversational AI is used frequently and in various ways. And, you know, kind of hopefully we can find our place within that ecosystem as, you know, kind of a source that is reliable and as a source that has, you know, sort of, once again, that kind of like human element to it. But in terms of immediate sort of changes, we haven't seen anything too drastic or anything that makes a clear connection between those two things so far.
We have developed a ChatGPT plugin, though, that uses Wikipedia exclusively as a source for prompts. So if you want to check that out and compare it to the rest of the internet, you're free to do so too.
I'm posting a link in reply to this question, Mark, where it talks about this plugin. You can read a little bit more into it.
Another question somebody asked is, were you scared to fundamentally change such a major global platform with the redesign, and how did you get over your fears, if you were?
Yeah, there was a funny moment. I think it was like a year into the redesign, something like that. And we were having an all hands meeting with the whole like staff or whatever. And there was someone there who had been on the team who had done the last big sort of redesign update. And this question came up, and I think I like turned it over to that person, and I was like, well, let's find out like what happened last time. And their answer was really funny, which was like, yeah, I was really worried, and then we did it, and like most people didn't even notice that it changed. So it's sort of a funny thing where like it is a really big, ubiquitous website, and we, again, did our best to preserve kind of the spirit of it. And we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about aesthetics and, what people are familiar with and why it looks the way it does and what parts of that are important to keep and whatever. I think, some of the articles that came out were pretty funny. They were like the barely noticeable Wikipedia redesign. And like, maybe that was supposed to be a diss or something. I'm not sure, but we were like celebrating that. And we were like, yes, like we pulled it off. We made all these big, like fundamental changes, but like, you don't really notice that it changed. And so, anyways, long story short, I think we were all pretty scared. The internet can definitely be like a cruel sort of like friend or whatever. But in the end, I think it's gone over like pretty well, all things considered.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, actually, I remember that meeting as well. And someone during that presentation directly asked us, like, how do you sleep at night? Which was going into the redesign, which was really funny. But no, the main thing that I would add too is that we were very careful around the changes that we made. So basically, we split out the entire sort of redesign into individual features. And for each one of those features, we would do pretty extensive qualitative testing prior to development, and then pretty extensive A/B testing as we were going to make sure that it performs, kind of like better than the previous iteration of that feature. And that kind of gave us the confidence that for every feature, we were good for that one, we could proceed to the next one. And then once we launched the entire thing, we then did another round of testing and just making sure that like KPIs look good, the metrics look good, that we didn't, see a random, kind of like huge drop in page views or in edits or anything like that. So we were pretty careful about like our instrumentation and just making sure that we're measuring the changes as we go along.
Yeah, very, very iterative changes was, I think, key to pulling it off in general, right? Like we could have done like all the work at once and then just revealed it to communities, but then like the flood of of bugs and things like that would have been just way overwhelming. So making these changes in very small steps, I think, was the key to pulling it off.
Another question that is very I would goes well with what I just asked. Somebody's asking, how did you measure the success of this new redesign?
So I think it was a mix of things. So as I mentioned, kind of our goal was to have the site be more welcoming. And we struggled with that goal because, how do you measure feeling welcomed? How do you measure being welcomed? And it was a mix between sort of like qualitative and user testing and a lot of quantitative testing. So we did a lot of things like prototype testing ahead of time for individual features. And we also did a lot of things like sentiment studies and being able to test sort of before and afters with various groups. When we were doing this testing, kind of the other thing that was really important for us is that we try to do it in a way that's representative of the audience. So we didn't just test, kind of in English speaking countries. We made sure that we can get people that can test, kind of globally. So we were able to do testing in India, in Ghana, in Argentina, and Indonesia, so that we can get, kind of like a better representation of global audiences and how they were responding to various things about the design. From there on, we didn't have necessarily, kind of like one main success metric for the overall design. What we did, as I mentioned earlier, is we split it out into the functional features and then measured those individually. So for example, when we made the new table of contents, we ran an A/B test of the new table of contents versus the older one. And we saw that the new one had 50% more engagement. When we had the new search, we were looking at searches to the using the new search system versus the old one. And so kind of the more quantitative metrics were feature-based, whereas overall we looked at, kind of things like main KPIs, so page views, edits, things like that. But we leaned a lot on the qualitative side too, of like how are people appreciating the new design sort of as a whole, as an aesthetic, as a readability, and kind of these more sort of vague concepts.
Yeah, I think another aspect there that's really hard to measure is like, actually, I think a month or two before we started working on the redesign, myself and another like designer engineer at the foundation worked on a a dark mode gadget, so you can read with like a black background. And one of the things that was kind of telling and also frustrating to us was like, we didn't know where to put the button to toggle between the two different modes, because like the information architecture of the site was sort of so confusing at that point, and it was so dense and kind of cluttered that it like was difficult to introduce new features or know sort of how the interface should grow or whatever. And so something at least I was thinking about, we talked about as a team, was kind of like setting ourselves up also for future success. How do we give ourselves a foundation that's going to allow us to grow and introduce new features and media and other kinds of things we talk about. I know also from an engineering perspective, there was like a ton of refactoring that happened and just making all of the front end code like a lot easier to work with. So it's like, yeah, there's other things that are pretty intangible too that I think matter a ton over the long term, but like it's not something you can easily measure or like demonstrate right away.
Yeah, for sure. Like we did want to create like a stable foundation, and we didn't, like the last redesign was 10 years ago. So we didn't want to just like finish this project, put a bow on it, and they say, okay, see you in a decade. So some of those more technical refactors were important from that perspective as well. But also, like 2 weeks ago, my mom told me she now knows how to switch languages on Wikipedia. So that's definitely a win.
Wow, that should have been.
That's the success metric there.
That's the metric.
We did it.
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. So we are at our scheduled time, but I would actually love to run over a little bit if you guys are open to it, and feel free to peel off and go to your next session if you're listening in. But I don't want to. I feel like we're having such a good conversation now. Let's maybe answer a couple more, and then we'll close it there. Let's give maybe 10 more.
Yeah, there's a really cool question that came in that is saying, off the French wiki icon point, are there any other examples of unique solutions that an instance came up with that felt so good that you had to upstream it to everybody?
Yeah, actually, yeah, and we should have probably mentioned this earlier on, but a lot of the inspiration for changes that we ended up like testing and making came from local changes that had been made. So I think it was Korean Wikipedia that had developed like a collapsible sidebar. Hebrew Wikipedia had developed a sticky header for logged in people, and maybe also some more like modular menus. There have been a bunch of really great, like, yeah, just almost more like user created, like Chrome plugins, other kinds of plugins. I know another designer developer at the foundation had created a floating table of contents gadget like a number of years ago. So it was like this really fun and cool process where, again, we sort of spend our time like going amongst these different versions of Wikipedia, sort of finding things and trying to understand things, and this like little treasure hunt or something. And yeah, probably should be better at crediting all of those different things. Again, it's hard to remember what came from where, but there were a number of cool moments throughout the project where volunteers would comment in like a task or in a discussion and be like, oh, wow, this is so great. Like, I've loved this feature as a gadget for the past 10 years. It's so awesome to see that you're now working on it kind of officially. So yeah, all of that stuff is happening. And a big part of our job is just like centralizing the good ideas and incorporating them into like the core experience.
And another question that came in is, with so many possible permutations, do you use any, I know you talked a little bit about testing methods, like any novel testing techniques to validate changes across instances at once?
I will shout out like one of our developers, Nick Ray. He developed this really cool tool that's become really handy at catching bugs, and it's just a visual testing tool. It just gives you like the the master branch, or like what's in production versus like this change, and it does it for thousands of screenshots. And we don't really have that like on production Wikipedias because they're so diverse. But even just having the ability to run visual tests against a change has been really helpful, because we have a lot of plugins, a lot of extensions, and things like that that we personally, like as developers, we don't work on locally, but then this tool loads kind of almost all the extensions that are in Wikipedia and sees, oh, are we affecting them? So that one, that it's on GitHub, it's called Pixel, I think, and it's under the Wikimedia repo. I can put a link there too.
Yeah, please show that link. Sorry.
I'll just say real quick too, this is something I'm like so curious how other people manage this as well, because even before you get to like the 300 plus Wikipedias, like just like Olga and I trying to keep track of like if the sidebar is open and you're logged in and you're scrolled down the page, so there's a sticky header there, but you're below a certain browser width, and like I find that stuff like incredibly difficult to keep track of. I think we had some like spreadsheets and like matrixed out like whatever. And like God bless Edward, the QA person on the team, who somehow manages to remember all of the different configurations to check. But like, anyways, yeah, discussion for another time. I'm super curious, like if there are tools that people use to like manage just remembering all of the different states and like conflicts and stuff like that.
Another question is, are the changes automatically applied to the English version, and other languages can choose to implement them, or can all editors choose?
So a bit of both. So the way that we worked is we started with a set of projects that had volunteered early on. They were really excited about the project and had volunteered early on and basically said, we want the changes as you're building it. And so for these projects, we basically would build out a feature, give it directly to them, and they would, kind of test it, give us feedback. So they were basically using the redesign since before it became what it was. They were started using it feature by feature. Once we were kind of more or less ready to scale and to bring it to more Wikipedias, the way we would work is we would approach different communities and we would say, okay, we think we're ready for your community. Is there anything specific that you need? Have we overlooked anything? And that's where these conversations of customization begin. There might be communities that say, yeah, it looks good, just go ahead and ship it. Whereas there might be communities that say, no, we really want you to finish building out this feature that you're planning for next month first. Or this works for us, but we want it tweaked in this particular way because we have a default gadget that we want to keep using and you're using that space for something else, for example. And so we would kind of make those changes over time until we were kind of like ready to bring it to all of the projects, to all of the Wikipedias. However, it is completely customizable. So if you have an account and you are an editor, you can choose between this new skin, which we called Vector 2022, the older version, which is called Vector, and also previous versions that go back as far as, I think, 2003. So yeah, you can make your Wikipedia look as new or as old as you wish. And there's also some volunteer created skins there too, and other kind of experimentations with different looks. Since we are the maintainers of this, not all of it will work perfectly, especially the skins that are 20 years old, but most of it will and does work pretty well. So if you choose to use it, you can.
That's fun to go retro. Cool. All right, let's wrap it there since we are about 10 over. Thank you guys so much, Alex, Olga, Jan, enough for curating the questions here. And yeah, to be continued. I feel like there's so much more to talk about. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Medium day.